two, one. All right. Welcome to the latest of the Colmam Power Organic Fitness Podcast. I have my latest guest here in front of me. Good friend of mine, most certainly, Clive Bright, the organic, most certainly farmer, Rare Ruminare, known on Instagram. And most certainly, Clive, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Coleman. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you. And most certainly, for those people, just to indicate that Clive is now outside. I'm super, super envious. In the direct sunlight. He's after setting up his, most certainly, apparatus, as he called it, before he would press record here. And he is soaking in the rays. Vitamin D coming at him from all angles.
Yeah, I have factor 50 on my bald head as well. So,
Clive, I just want to start off, I suppose, and you introducing yourself to the likes of the listeners here. Just tell them a little bit about, I suppose, where you are, where you're based, and what you're currently doing with, I suppose, your farming methods and techniques.
Yeah, cool. So, as Coleman indicated, my name is Clive Bright. I'm a beef farmer an organic beef farmer in South Sligo, near Ballymote, and we're 100% grass-fed operation, and we really do our best to kind of push the I suppose boundaries is the wrong word, but to continue to improve beyond the basis of organic standards. So we're an organic farm, so we follow all those rules, but we also try to, the ethos behind organic farming is essentially to farm in sync or close to nature, and we try not to rest on our laurels of being an organic farm and try and keep questioning how we can improve farming closer to nature. So that's kind of really what we do. We have a cow herd, so we breed we breed calves and we rear on the male calves and finish them on 100% grass diet to beef, and that's our main business output. So yeah.
Right, and I want you to most certainly tell me the likes of what would the difference between something that isn't organic as opposed to the meat of the beef that you certainly produce on a regular basis, like just to the listeners.
Well, I suppose from the nutrient quality point of view, I leave that to you, Coleman, because I'm not a scientist or a nutritionist. But the way I look at it is more from an ecological standpoint and the benefit that animals can have in the landscape, and for a farming system that's really simple and kind of, as I said, in sync with nature. Like, the closer you are in sync with nature, the easier it is. So we really try to farm as simply and basically as we can. It's actually, I find it a really good test. If farming is hardship, I think you're doing it wrong. Yeah, everything that proves difficult, we focus in on that and question it and try to think, how would nature do this? And if we can let nature do the heavy lifting, then it gets a lot easier. But in the broader landscape, then, these animals moving around in their kind of our job, I suppose, is to manage their habitat as much as possible. And I think that's actually a really important idea, that the job of a farmer is to create livestock habitat. And we've very often kind of missed that point. Like, we talk about habitat for nature and everything else, but livestock are living creatures too. So creating habitat for them, I think, is a really good mindset to get yourself in. Like, what would these animals require or seek in nature, and try and provide that for them on the farm. So yeah, I suppose by doing all that, allowing them access to a very broad diet in the pastures, and we're aspiring as much as possible to get as much woody species and trees on the farm as well. We're heavily interested in agroforestry, and even very simple and old things like hedgerows and promoting them as much as possible and allowing them to kind of flourish and flower and come out, take up space in the fields, I suppose. They are a huge resource for livestock from the point of view of welfare, shelter and shade. But that also has a productive kind of knock-on in that if animals are too hot, like today I just moved my cows, and I had planned to move them onto one field, and we actually made an executive decision to change the direction they went, because they have very little shade on the field I planned to move them into, and for the next 10 days it's going to be like this. So I've changed my rotation so that they have full noonday access to noonday shade for the next 10 days. And in the future, we would hope that we'd develop the farm to a stage where I didn't have to make those decisions, that every paddock could provide that. But at the moment, we have to make do with what we got. But by animals having access to be able to browse on those hedges, that lovely new shoots of hawthorn, they love eating that. They love all the plants that grow in hedgerows. There's a whole other spectrum of plants that grow from the hedgerow, like the stuff that you see along the side of the road, that you won't get out in a kind of pasture that's been managed constantly for grazing. So giving them that range of dietary inputs means they can balance their diet a lot better themselves, and animals are very in tune. Well, most animals are very in tune and adapted to be able to do that. And if they have a full range of access to nutrients, then the meat will have that too, you know, and it'll transfer into the quality of the meat.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, an important point that some people mightn't have ever heard about before, Clive. It's the fact that on organic farms, such as yourself, would incorporate in a diversity of foods for their beneficial, I suppose, gut. And as again, you are not only what you eat, but you are what you eats. And that's something that people wouldn't have ever heard about before.
Yeah, exactly. And like a lot of, although this is thousands of year old wisdom, a lot of it is kind of how a lot of ecology and plant biology and soil biology especially is really coming to the fore in the last 10, 15 years. And like it's some of it, although anecdotally logical, and you know, you can find evidence of people tapping into these ideas even in folklore. The actual evidence scientifically for a lot of this stuff is really new, like cutting edge stuff. So but it's really exciting, and it's so cool when you kind of make a realization or break down a kind of mental barrier in your head that maybe was formed by, you know, there's lots of modern farming traditions that were kind of been sucked into in the last 80 to 100 years with agricultural inputs, especially. Like loads of people don't believe you can grow grass without fertilizer, which is insane. You know, grass has evolved for tens of thousands of years. So, and you know, the principal tool that I would use on managing this farm is time, and in one sense, time can be free, and sunlight and time and our base resource of soil. So allowing plants time to get to that fully recovered stage has huge benefits in lots of ways. For the plant itself, but for the soil and for the animal as well, because a plant that grows slower without stress often will have a lot of extra nutrient kind of makeup and secondary metabolites and all that kind of stuff. And again, it all feeds into the beef.
Yeah, and too right. I suppose just to expand on that point there, Clive. So what do you use, I suppose, compared to opposite to the conventional farmers to have a healthy, structured soil that the animals are feeding off grass on I suppose, a year-round basis?
Yeah, it's time is the only thing, time and time management. So essentially, what kind of we kind of focus on a kind of idea called holistic management, and it's basically a framework that was developed by a guy called Alan Savory to make decisions, and it's all based off kind of ecological principles. So every decision you make, you test it against ecological principles. So you go, is this going to allow this field to photosynthesize more? Is it going to help it infiltrate more water and help in the water cycle? Is it going to cycle more nutrients and minerals? And is it going to increase diversity on my farm, or at least maintain diversity on the farm? And if the answers to all that are yes, then it's very likely your decision is a good one. And if it's no, then you really have to consider, is it worth making that sacrifice and follow through with that decision, or should you alter your decision? And it sounds a bit highfalutin and a bit abstract, but it's actually really simple. You know, it's just like, do I graze my grass when it's this short, or do I allow it to get this tall? And by doing that, then you've just allowed that plant to store a load more energy in its roots. So when it's grazed, it'll grow again faster. Its roots will be deeper, so it'll infiltrate water better, and it'll be less stressed as well, so it's less likely to go to seed so quickly. So there's a whole load of benefits, but yet modern agricultural traditions would kind of steer us towards grazing grass a lot shorter, so it's higher in protein, and you can, you know, get faster growth and all these kind of things. And that may be the case for a very short period of the year, but then that's sward is very vulnerable to drought, for example. It's very vulnerable to frost in the latter end of the years, and it's not very resilient, I suppose. Whereas if you have a taller pasture that's more diverse, then it can stand up to a lot more environmental pressures and weather pressures, and also I believe it's a lot more nutrient dense and diverse as well. It may not have the huge punch of protein, but it will also have fiber in there from some stalkier grasses and things like that. And I think it all adds up, and the animals get to balance their diet again. You know, if the protein level in the grass is too high, often they'll just pass it right through them, and they won't be able to utilize it because they haven't enough fiber. So yeah, simply by allowing time and managing the animals on the farm, we have a lot of different paddocks, and we move the cows every day, or sometimes twice a day, or sometimes every 2 days, depending on how fast the grass is growing. But our primary goal is to make sure when we come round on that rotation that the grass is recovered again in the paddock we were in initially. So it's about pacing and managing the time that cows are in each paddock, first of all, but also how long each paddock gets to recover before it's regrazed. And that's essentially all we do. We spend a lot of time thinking and planning that, and we adjust it throughout the season depending on grass growth. So the simple rule to follow is, when grass is growing fast, we move the cows really fast, because we don't want the grass to get ahead of us and go all stemmy. We don't mind if some of it goes to seed within a paddock, so we don't mind our paddocks to be really unevenly grazed and quite messy, because we're trying to harness that natural chaos that happens in nature. So we very rarely mow out paddocks, or we very rarely graze them out really tight in the summer. We do that in wintertime. So we just allow for as much leaf area to be left behind, so we've constant photosynthesis happening, and yeah, just keep on moving them. And then if for instance there was a droughty period, which likely might happen now, we might actually make a decision, if grass growth starts to slow down, to actually slow down the grazing, so that when we come round that rotation again, that, you know, our rotation at the moment is about 30 days, but if we slowed it down to 50 days because there was a drought, when we come round that rotation again, that that grass will have recovered, which is vital, because if you graze grass that hasn't fully recovered, you actually diminish the vigor of the grass. So the key thing is making sure that that grass is recovered and it's stored energy back in its roots to be regrazed again.
All right, I'm going to touch on a point. Maybe, how did you first get into the likes of maybe the organics, or were you always grown up on a farm, Clive? Just, I suppose, to tell the listeners a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I've often kind of tried to rake my mind for this, and I don't really know. I had a weird fascination from being really young. I have a really strong memory of going to the library in town here, which is a tiny little library, a room on the end of the courthouse in Ballymote, and asking them to order in a books on organic farming, and they could only they could only find one, and it was oh, what was it called? Nick Lampkin was the author, and it was just called Organic Farming, and it was as thick as a Bible. You know, it was big, and for whatever age I was, 10 or 12 at the time, it was completely inaccessible. But it was an indicator that I had some interest at the time, and the only influence I can think of is actually Doreen Allen on when she was she had that show Kelly, well, Simply Delicious, because I used to watch that with my mum, and yeah, and she'd always be on about her organic eggs, and and I used to keep chickens at the time, so it was this little connection. So I was I think she may have sparked my interest, and it went from there. So I'll blame Dorina for now.
So you went from chickens then directly on to, I suppose, cattle. And did you mention what breed of cattle that you have as well?
No, we're very fickle as far as breeds go. I think the key thing around types of animals, I kind of alluded to it earlier, that some animals are very good at selecting their own diets, and essentially we run our farming system the best way we can here for the land, for ourselves, and for the livestock. But the key thing, I think, within that formula is to have animals that are adapted to the land. So we have a very strict culling policy. So anything that doesn't suit the system gets culled, basically. Anything that causes me hardship or annoys me gets culled. And because it's essentially a farm where we breed animals for beef, the cows all have to be able to calve on their own, rear a calf on their own, and get back in calf again on their own. And my job in that is to make sure their habitat is suitable for all those things. And so if they can do all that, we're selecting automatically for fertility, and fertility and the kind of reproductive organs within an animal are really the first ones to shut down in times of stress, you know, or if an animal isn't getting all its nutrients or isn't functioning within the environment that they're in, they won't be fertile. So it's a great indicator that your animals are suited for your system. So the main thing we would cull for on top of that is size. We like a neater animal. They're generally more kind of efficient in lots of ways, from feed intake to we used to have really high, big cows that were like 700 or 800 kilos, and we found the calves they produced were never that great. And they were very good cows at maintaining themselves. They were always fat and always looked fantastic, but they were kind of putting their energy was being put into themselves rather than their calves. So we've tried to keep the cow size a little bit smaller, and they tend to produce calves that are not huge, but that are relative to their size are more efficient. So and they're lighter on the land, and they tend to process a fodder-based diet a lot better. So we select more for cow type than breed, but that has led us down the road of more traditional breeds. As a general rule, we've kept loads of different bulls. We've had Angus bulls, Hereford bulls, Shorthorns, Irish Moyles, really interesting Irish breed. Love them actually, and their beef tastes phenomenal. We currently have a Galloway bull, also great breed. And I suppose we selected bulls that were a little bit smaller than what you'd see in the conventional kind of goals of people within farming. Most people want the big bulls, so they get bigger animals. But we've just tried to create or select for animals that are neater and more efficient on a grass-based diet, and will finish easier. Because often the kind of smaller, buttier animals will be really efficient on a grass-based diet, and they'll flesh out really quickly and easily. Whereas if an animal starts to get really rangy and big and tall, it takes a lot more nutrient input to put muscle and flesh on that type of an animal. And they'll put a lot of their energy into growing bone and height rather than bulk. And they're equal, you know. Again, with time, those animals are fine, they'd work, but the economic benefits of having a neater animal are better, and they're also easier to manage on the land. You know, they're lighter on the land, they don't have as much impact in wet weather, they're less likely to do damage and things like that. And the way I always look at it is if you have two really big animals, you can carry three smaller animals, you know, with the same nutrient inputs, and it from an output and profit point of view, it kind of all adds up. So yeah, there we go. So,
yeah, well, I suppose what you're doing is putting up and setting a system that suits you and most certainly the land as well, and then you slot into the likes of their organic system quite well, because then it's the idea that it's, we'll use that word if you like, regenerative. It's something that isn't as harsh on the land, and that's what we should be looking at towards more. Not only looking after ourselves, our own health, but also the environment as well as the animals that are grazing off it.
Totally, yeah, and it all just adds together. You know, you end up having everything is a given. Then, you know, if you like take the organic standards as your very basic baseline of targets you want to reach. But organic standards are very much a list of knots. You know, they're a list of I will not spray fertilizer or spray pesticides, and that's all a given, really. But as far as aspirations of how far you can bring your farm, I always look at the organic standards as a baseline. You know, if you can do that, you can do so much more on top of it. You know.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that point. Maybe expand on the idea of controlling weeds in an organic farm. How is that done on a more regular basis with yourself on your land? As well as that, are there any, I suppose, remedies, maybe holistic or otherwise, maybe eating ivy for some of the animals when they're grazing through the likes of the trees and shrubs, which you have in dividing some of your fields? Yeah, just give us a little bit of brief touching points on those.
Yeah, I think the weed thing is more of an attitude than anything else. We have loads of weeds on the farm, and some of them I see as really functional. Like there were fields, and I can see some of them are really clear indicators of damage that happened in the past. Like there are fields that we would have set grazed or left cattle on for most of the summer without moving them around in the past, and the damage is still there from that. And we're in South Sligo, as I mentioned, and it's a drumlin landscape, and the geological lottery of what we got soil wise is interesting in that it's very varied in one sense, but it's all quite heavy and somewhat marginal. Now we have some very good and deep soils, but they're really prone to compaction, and they're high in iron. And there's, because of maybe, you know, times in the past where soil was exposed in a minor way and heavy rains and everything else, the iron leached down, and it's created an iron pan under most of our farms. So even in the better fields, when you dig down, you often hit this impermeable layer within the soil, which kind of limits the capacity of grass to grow. Well, it doesn't limit the capacity of grass to grow, but it limits the potential of the land, I suppose. Because it's only functioning within those top few inches, whereas there's loads of soil beneath that's not being tapped into. Yeah, so there's areas where there's lots of rushes, which are probably the trickiest one for an organic farmer, and we have patches of docks and we have patches of thistles. But we used to have full fields of thistles, and we used to go out
Growing
every
them.
year. Oh, prime harvest. We used to. I remember one of my jobs, once I learned to drive a tractor, was to manage a particular field throughout the summer. And I had to time when I went out and top that field to get the thistle heads before they flowered. And the theory was that if I did that right for 3 years, the thistles would go, because we'd burn out the seed bank, and I wouldn't have given the thistles a chance to seed, so that they would disappear. Now that never happened, and I did a fantastic job. So, but the reason the thistles are there is because there's compaction there, and the calcium in that soil is locked up, and there was exposed soil and in the past where thistle seeds thistle's job within nature ecologically is to break up that compaction, accumulate calcium from deeper down with that deep taproot, and it's spiky, so grazing animals don't stop it from doing that job until it's finished. And so it's a really clever plant ecologically. It's protected itself, and it's doing a really vital function for that soil. So we just let the thistles do their thing, and by doing that and not topping them 3 times a year, driving across the field that's already compacted with a heavy tractor, and allowing them to get that deep taproot, and allowing them to go to seed. And it actually doesn't really matter if they go to seed now, because we have so much grass and so much grass density. We have very little bare soil, and anywhere there is bare soil, I want thistles to grow there so they can fix it. So that's what I mean about an attitude change. So there's loads of these indicator weeds. Docks are another one, that are actually doing a job, and if you let them do that job, they'll do themselves out of a job, because they'll repair that soil to a point where the succession of that soil moves on, and you'll grow grasses and different plants that you actually are more habitable, are more palatable. And that's essentially what we let happen. And it's really cool, Colmam, because now we have fields that were full of thistles that have still quite a lot of thistles in them, but there's loads of grass as well, and there's a few docks, and there's a few dandelions, but there's also more grass than we've ever grown when we were conventional, and spreading fertilizer, and the weeds and the different plants, and forbs, or whatever you want to call them, all add to the soil function. They all add to the photosynthetic potential of your farm. They're all cycling nutrients. They're all creating soil structure, and some of them are palatable, and the ones that aren't are doing a job. So that's the way I leave it. But rushes, on the other hand, rushes are a weed of stagnation, and there's a couple of these within nature. Bracken would be another one. But they're also a huge indicator. What I mean by weed of stagnation is that they culture the environment they need to grow in. So a rushy field, if you keep letting them rushes grow, they're not going to fix the problem or the reason the rushes are there. Because rushes can breathe through their leaves. Most plants need to breathe through their roots as well. So rushes like an anaerobic environment, an environment with little or no oxygen, and they like a waterlogged environment, and that's their habitat, and they'll actually culture that habitat. So there's no prescriptive solution to fixing rushes. What I would say is what you need to do is get to the root cause of the problem, because if you, for instance, just keep topping rushes, you're essentially giving them the same edge the grass has, because grass, by grazing grass and allowing it to fully recover, you fully rejuvenate that grass. If you top rushes, you'll do the same to that. So you're just giving it more oomph. You're giving it new growth to have more power. Now there's lots of kind of very expensive ways to deal with rushes, both expensive in a monetary sense and an ecological way. You could top those rushes every week and make your field into a lawn, and that will eradicate rushes, but it'll also eradicate most of your grasses too. So probably not the best idea. In my context, with our iron pan and our heavy soil, my thinking on it is that this soil was obviously, this land was cleared of trees at some point in the last few thousand years to make agricultural land. And it's functioned quite well as agricultural land for quite a long time. But I think the demise of the structure of that soil has been accelerated in the last 80 to 100 years with the mostly synthetic inputs, I think, but also physical things like heavy tractors or slurry can be quite damaging to the structure of soil. So all these kind of modern innovations, and mowing silage early can be quite damaging to soil, because you're leaving the soil exposed. For instance, when you mow for silage, you cut really low, and you always do it in good weather, so that soil is essentially exposed to baking sun for weeks potentially, and then when it rains, that soil caps because it gets rain on what's mostly bare soil. So until that field gets to recover, there's a period there of risk to damaging that soil structure. So that's a very simple kind of innocuous thing that everybody does, but it has a damaging effect on the soil. So I think over those many years have been farmed both in a more gentle way in the past and more intensive way in the more recent past, that the soil on our farm has got to a point where it's really gone. It's going to take hundreds of years of grass grazing to repair it. But my hope and my plan and my thinking is the best way to correct that quickly is with trees. And that's why that's one of the many reasons I'm so keen on agroforestry and including more trees within our pastures, and using the trees as a restorative tool to kind of break up that like the physical power of those big tree roots breaking through that iron pan and restructuring the soil at a deeper level, allowing more water infiltration so that we're more drought resilient because we have a deeper bank of kind of moist soil underneath our grass plants. And on top of that, all these kind of benefits that you get from a welfare point of view of cattle never having to seek for shelter or shade because it's always there within the pastures, and the kind of access to little bits of more browse and, like you say, ivy on some of those trees if they're allowed to get rested long enough that those kind of plants can grow. There's so many benefits to planting more trees within pastures. I think for this farm, in my context, it's the solution for rushes, and especially on the marginal fields where you can just sort out the soil, get more fungi into that soil. A lot of agricultural soils are lacking kind of beneficial fungi, again, due to compaction, due to disturbance, due to synthetic inputs in the past. And it takes a long time sometimes for these things to recover, especially if they're constantly being checked by agricultural processes and not allowing nature to do all the heavy lifting. But I think by planting loads of trees across our pasture grounds and still grazing beneath them, we're going to multiply the amount of photosynthesis that's happening. So we'll have two layers of leaves. We'll have the pasture layer and the canopy layer. And just managing that canopy so there's enough light getting into the pasture is the key, and managing the livestock so that they're not damaging the trees, so the trees will all be protected and guarded in their early stages. And because we rotate quite quickly, when the trees are more mature, the animals are very unlikely to damage the trees. So that's our plan for the future, and that's our solution to our weeds of stagnation. We're gonna rattle them out of their stagnation and get trees to do all our heavy lifting.
No, but it is so cool, and you've explained it so well in relation to like weeds do give massive benefits, and that quote that comes to mind is a weed is the definition of a weed is a plant in the wrong place, and it is most certainly exactly that. It's literally creating benefits, breaking up that sub layer, and such a cool story in relation to you being previously told one thing about the likes of mowing your land for, I suppose, 3 times throughout one growing season, and that had very little effect. But now, as a result of stopping the likes of your mowing and leaving them go to flower, it's recovered the soil, and not only there's the weeds, but there's actually even more so a pasture for the animals to graze on a more regular basis. I just want, I suppose, Clive, and be conscious of your time, tell, I suppose, the listeners a little bit about quickly in relation to either where you can get some of your products, where's the best place to contact you, or anything else maybe similar to that point.
Cool. Yeah. We've a very simple business model. So we finish all our beef animals on grass, as I said, and we're actually trying to do that year round now. So last winter the last 2 winters we've succeeded in carrying animals right through the winter, and finishing them right through the winter. So we try and kill an animal every month essentially, or 2 sometimes, or 3 sometimes, but we've tried to make it a year-round thing. Now this year there was a bit of a hungry gap between April and now, but we're back in full production again, and so essentially we sell one product, which is a 20-kilo beef box, and within that beef box, there's a range of cuts. There's a couple of back-end roasts, a couple of fore-end roasts. There's a small amount of all the steaks. So there'll be some strip loins and ribeye and all that kind of stuff, and a few fillets. And there'll be a good portion of mince and some stew, and maybe some stir fry strips, and it kind of varies a little bit how the butcher processes whether it's winter or summer. So we have more barbecue type cuts in the summer. It's very subtle, and he'd maybe make more stew and fore-end roasty things, and shin beef and things like that in the wintertime, so that there's more kind of stocky, slow cooking, wintry
meat for people to consume on a more regular basis. Yeah. And it's the best place, Clive, for people to contact you directly through Instagram at the Rare Ruminare, or is there any other, I suppose, contact details that you'd like to share?
Rareruminare.com is a website, so everything's kind of explained on there. That's probably the best place to go to get a breakdown of all the details. And email is probably the best. If you just email Clive